Hey everyone, this is BlackHawkIC and welcome back to this channel. In this video, I'll talk about the place of sniper mechs in MWO and my recommendation for building sniper mechs for quick play. Now, to be clear about what sniping is, when I talk about sniping, it's when somebody's playing really far off away from their team, using exclusively long-range weapons, usually on an ECM mech. When you're at mid-range and positioned with your team, poking out of cover, taking a shot, and getting back to cover, that is not sniping, but rather taking peeks. So this video is only going to focus on the former definition. I think a lot of people have the wrong idea about sniping in MWO, especially given its relative ineffectiveness. It gets overused in this game, first of all, and when they are used, sniper weapons are often put on the wrong mechs. So what are some of these misconceptions? For most players, MWO isn't the first shooter they've played in their life. Almost everyone has played a milsim game before MWO, like something from the Battlefield or Call of Duty series. Unfortunately, a lot of player behavior that gets learned in those games get incorrectly transferred to MWO. A critical difference between standard military shooter and MWO is that mechs have armor and the humans that you shoot at in games like Call of Duty are very fragile compared to mechs. MWO is not a one-shot, one-kill game. Snipers and milsim shooters can be very effective in the right hands. As long as you're in a good position, you can often take the first shot at an enemy and never get shot back because the guy you shot died instantly. In MWO, that first shot advantage isn't as significant, especially when it's taken by one of those light or medium snipers with not much firepower. The enemy will know where they're getting shot from and then respond appropriately, and this is the biggest reason why sniping isn't as strong in MWO as it is in other shooters. Sniping in MWO can be detrimental to you and your team in other ways. First, long-range weapons in general have the worst DPS in the game. The damage output of ER large lasers and ER PPCs are limited by their higher heat than their mid-range counterparts. Ballistics is usually limited by weight in the case of Gauss rifles and AC2s. Because of how much armor there is on the battlefield in a typical quick play match, DPS is a big factor in the current MWO meta. No matter what build you take, if your build focuses on long-range combat, your DPS will suffer. The next problem is positioning. Now, if you take long-range weapons, you want to be at ranges where the enemy is too far away to shoot you back. However, this is easier said than done because most of your team is trying to get closer to the enemy since they're not carrying long-range weapons like you are, and that leaves you vulnerable to getting backstabbed by fast mechs with high DPS loadouts. We'll actually see an example of this in one of my demo videos. So when a team gets close to the enemy, you really have two choices. One of them is to remain in your ranged position and risk getting flanked. Or 2, move with your team and be at a range where your weapons are not optimal. If you choose option 1, you have to be very wary of your surroundings and reposition if you see a flank coming. A lot of people start playing snipers thinking that it makes them safer, whereas it's often the opposite case. Some people try to get around the problem by taking ECM light mechs with long-range weapons that can reposition quickly. Unfortunately, these kinds of builds have some of the worst DPS in the game, and even if you survive till the end, you haven't done much damage. Take the infamous dual ER large laser Raven 3L for example. With an ECM and XL 285 engine, your sustained DPS is a mere 2.5, and that's not taking into account the times when your DPS is idle due to needing to reposition. An alternative build with triple MPLs and an SRM6 gives you about 6 DPS sustained if you fire only the SRM and a single MPL. I'm not actually recommending this 3L build, but it gives you an idea of how much DPS you're giving up by taking long-range weapons on a light. The ECM light won't always be safe either because if a sniper light reacts too late and gets caught by a short-range light, it would be very difficult for the sniper to win a 1v1. Even if a sniper doesn't get backstabbed, both teams are moving around the map, which sometimes can leave you with no targets to shoot at. Take for example on Frozen City. A lot of snipers like to sit across the opposite end of the central valley and shoot across. However, if the two teams are fighting among the buildings, a lot of times there are no enemies exposed to your line of sight and you have to rotate to a better position. This means at minimum your average DPS for the game goes down since your weapons are sitting idle, or even worse, when you get closer, your low DPS build has to compete with higher DPS and higher alpha, mid, or short range builds. For players who enjoy playing ECM sniper lights, I suggest exploring an alternative, which is to swap your long-range weapons to mid-range ones instead. So for example, ER mediums for clan and large lasers for IS. This will still allow you to peek and poke at relatively safe ranges, but gives you better DPS due to higher heatsink count or better heat efficiency. You'll also make smaller rotations around the map when the enemy team moves, which helps to prevent your weapons from being idle. Despite all that I've said though, snipers can sometimes be game changers. Against some teams that can't respond appropriately to snipers, the constant long-range harassment will force a team to reposition to somewhere that is not ideal for them. In that sense, although snipers often don't do enough damage to directly affect the game's outcome, they end up playing a support role that helps this team perform better. I also recognize that some players have to play at range due to PC hardware or physical issues that prevent them from reacting quickly. So even though I've thus far said that sniping isn't a consistently good role in MWO, it's still a legitimate tactic. And there are few mechs that can play sniper as a primary role while mitigating several of the major issues these mechs can encounter. Among these, the MAD-IIC-D is the one that feels the most flexible to me, and therefore deals with the unpredictable maps and teams of the solo queue the best. The build that I run on my MAD-IIC-D shouldn't surprise those who already have the chassis. There are several key points that makes this build well suited for the solo queue sniping. First, the ER large lasers and Gauss rifle combo has good DPS at long range and is still competitive at mid-range and short range, where most of MWO's fights take place. The extra heat sinks over the same build on the Night Gear gives it better sustained damage over the course of the match. The ECM takes the mech off of the enemy radar such that you don't automatically get swarmed as soon as one enemy mech sees you. When you do need to reposition, the Marauder 2C carries a sufficiently large engine so it's not extremely slow to move around the map. When the Marauder gets surprised by a light in the back, the fact that the Gauss rifles are arm mounted is a huge advantage. First, the high damage fast pinpoint projectiles deal fairly well with light mechs. A dual Gauss to the leg often ends up with a light mech dying moments later. Next, the Gauss rifles are not as easy to crit as torso mounted weapons. This is a problem with mechs like the Quad Gauss KDK-3 and Hellbringer, where the MG Light can easily take out all of its torso mounted weapons from the back within a few seconds. The arm mounted Gauss can shoot down at lights who are also hugging your legs, and has the aiming speed to keep up with those that attempt to circle strafe your mech. The weaponry can even deal with some heavier mechs 1v1. But you don't want to take on multiple mechs at once. In summary, the MAD-IIC-D has a good balance of range, DPS, mobility, and anti-light counters that make it a great choice when you feel like sniping in the solo queue. For the skill tree, we want to make sure to get the 2 ECM nodes first. Get some cool run nodes and put the rest of the skill points on cooldown, range, and laser duration. Durability is probably the least important skill tree for this build, but we have the skill points to nearly max it out as well. Okay, let's get into a couple of matches. So this match on Canyon Network is more typical of a solo queue match that you might see. So it's kind of NASCAR heavy, it's more mid-rangey, but you can kind of see how kind of this sniper build will play in this sort of more mid-range to close range scenario. But you know, because we are in a sniper build, we want to try to get out in the open as much as possible and use our range as much as possible throughout the match. So we want to get out early. We want to get out into the open early on, because anything that we see, as soon as we peek out, we are in a range to be able to shoot at. So we want to get out some of that early damage. And in this case, we got some shots on that Mad Cat that was walking across the canyon. That wasn't really long range, but it was kind of sort of on the long mid-range distance. So we're able to get some early damage out right there. And we're kind of walking towards, we know there's a blip over here. There's a Jaeger mech, like kind of right to my right side, as you see here, the Delta. This guy, as I mentioned, you gotta, even if you're a long range guy, you still need to reposition with your team, unless you want to be like this guy and get killed, you know, get flanked by lights. So, you know, he goes down right there. Yeah, so if you stay long range, a lot of times this will happen to you. See a bunch of guys here. We just happen to have a strike. I usually don't take strikes in my matches, but I have so many from events. So I drop one right there. I think I got a bunch of hits from that strike. But mostly what I really wanted to do was to push that group of enemies back behind that cover. So which it did effectively. Now, I could have stayed all the way on the other side, and that might have been a good choice, but I wasn't really sure whether they would rotate around and allow me to shoot them from, let's say, the Bravo 5 area. So I'm kind of, getting closer, and then I'm anticipating that they might be, staying back here for a little while, and so I kind of rotated around toward Delta 3 and then started shooting here. And then a friendly Atlas blocks my shot.
Back up the ramp, cut across.
So we're going through the standard NASCAR right now. Not really my ideal range, but we still have pretty decent DPS, even at mid-range here. Well, mid to short range, really.
Got a command over here.
So we're trying not to take the brunt of the enemy's fire, but we are in an assault, so we can still tank a little bit of damage. Our team's doing pretty well, so we have a 4-1 lead right now. 5-1 now. So this match is going pretty fast, and this is fairly typical of solo queue matches these days. There's a lot of mid to short range engagements. DPS really matters, and you can see we're not doing too badly here. We've already gotten a couple of kills, and the heat sinks allows us to remain pretty cool throughout the match. The heat sinks and the combination of Gauss rifles and ER large lasers. Only 2 ER large lasers. Trying to leg that commando, but he shuts himself down, and he goes down. Yeah, it's a very quick match. I think this is, in terms of actual engagement time, was probably like 4 minutes, 30 seconds or something like that.
Thought that commando was gonna
And put out quite a bit of damage. So sometimes you get lucky with the map selection, map votes, and you get a map like Rubelite Oasis or Alpine Peaks or Frozen City Assault. Then you can spend quite a bit of time, in a proper sniping position. And similarly with the Canyon Network match, we want to get out of cover as soon as possible to get our weapons out. So even when they're beyond your optimal range of your Gauss rifles and your ER large lasers, you can still take some shots. Especially with the ER large lasers, they can do quite a bit of damage to, past 1,000 meters. So we're here in a pretty good position. So like the top level of the Rubelite map is really good. Gives you a lot of angles throughout the map where you're out of range for a lot of enemy mechs and you have good firing position. You can see a lot of stuff across the map. And the other thing with snipers is that by taking up these high up positions, you're shooting the enemy at a different angle, so you're not crowding 1 or 2 different positions on the map that all your other team members are trying to use. And so this is a good way to put fire down and try to make the enemy team rotate out of your line of sight. One thing that we are noticing right now is this kind of NASCAR coming onto our left side. Right now you can see there's 3, 4, 5 mechs coming, rotating towards my left, and there's really only 3 mechs holding the line. against those 5. So that line is probably going to collapse pretty soon, and you know, I'm gonna have to rotate out of position like right about now. I'm not going to be able to hold them back, so that line was just simply lost due to NASCAR. I'm better alive than dead. I wouldn't survive long against those mechs over there. So what I could have done here was to try to find another ranged position, but you know, if I want to do that, I'm gonna have to rotate even further, a much longer distance away from the enemy team, and that's just gonna waste DPS for me. So I'm gonna try to get to mid-range and support at mid-range instead of, you know, trying to fight at long range, purely at long range. So the match is about even right now. And then, so yeah, we're just gonna go for these like mid-range engagements, and that was a pretty poor shot on the Hunchback. It changed elevation just as I was releasing the Gauss rifle. So I ended up shooting above its head as it went down. So for the rest of the match, you can see kind of we were just going for those short to mid-range short to mid-range engagements. We're simply supporting the rest of our team here. We no longer have to be in these range positions, and we're simply using our DPS to finish off these enemies. So hopefully you can see how this mech can perform in a more ideal scenario and a more ideal map, and it can certainly do quite well in that scenario as well. Okay guys, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, make sure to subscribe to this channel for more MD Build content like this, and see you next time.